Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, listener. Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 95 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. So today I am devoting this episode to discussing the social contract in your tabletop RPG. And if you are not currently using a social contract with your group, then I think this episode will be very illuminating and educational to you. And hopefully by the end of it, we've convinced you of the merits of using a social contract and how you can just avoid a lot of unfun situations from the very beginning with a good social contract. So you notice I said I have a guest joining me on the show today. Christopher from Sharkbone Podcast is joining me to tackle this subject. So we'll see if we can take apart the social contract and tell you what it is and how to use it and how to make it work for you and your group at your own gaming table. So you can find the show notes for this episode at starwalkerstudios.com/gamemastersjourney/95. Definitely go check out those show notes. We'll have lots of helpful links to you about things that we discussed today in the social contracts discussion, as well as ways that you can get a hold of Christopher and find this podcast and all kinds of great stuff like that. So go check out the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. Christopher from Sharkbone Podcast is joining me on the show today, and we're going to talk about social contracts. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Thanks, Lex. Great to be on. Been a big fan. Listened to you way back in GM Intrusions.
Oh,
it's
wow.
It's actually your fault that I started looking into Numenera, The Strange, and Cypher System.
Awesome.
And even though I don't play those games, you always have great stuff to say, so I'm glad to be able to add my voice to the show.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of your podcast as well. And actually, we've followed each other on Twitter for quite a long time before I even realized that you were the same person that's on the Sharkbone Podcast.
Yeah, well, I have on G Plus and Twitter different usernames, so it's not that easy to correlate the two.
Yeah. So you guys did an episode on social contracts pretty far back in your show, episode 4, was it?
Pod Chatter episode 4.
Yeah.
Which was back in June of 2015.
Yeah.
So it's been a while, and I've probably forgotten a lot of things I talked about, but...
So maybe you can start out and just tell the listener a little bit about your podcast in case they don't know about it yet.
All right. Sharkbone Podcast was actually started by a friend of mine, Devin, and he started it several years ago. And when he started it back then, it was watching movies or short segments of TV shows and talking about how you can take stuff from the movie or TV show and apply them to your games. And then he went on a short hiatus and he decided to come back to it. And the new format, we actually have 2 distinct show types. We have our Pod Chatter, which is what the social contract episode was, which is just the two of us gabbing on the mics about a specific topic. And we do that live over Google Hangouts once a month. So our listeners can actually join in. We have the Q&A app open so they can send us questions and join the conversation. Otherwise, we also have the Sandbox episodes, which are world building. We have several different districts for the Sandbox, and so we do world building in different types. Like we have our cyberpunk district, we have our space opera district, our post-apocalyptic, our pirate district, our superhero district, our fantasy district, our modern horror district. And each week we talked about a different district, and we've actually moved on from phase 1, which was creating people and places, which we call faces and locations for each district. And now we're on to phase 2, which is holidays and landmarks, which I think we've only done 2, maybe 3 holiday and landmarks episodes. So we just started doing those.
Awesome. Well, I know I have some listeners that really dig the world building stuff, so definitely go check out Sharkbone. You guys have quite a bit more world building content than I do, at least so far.
Well, we concentrate on world building for the first half of the show, and so we just recently branched off into the Pod Chatter to do a little bit more diverse show type.
Awesome.
And it's honestly very difficult coming up with new and unique things every week when it comes to world building.
Yeah. I feel your pain. That's why my episodes are so infrequent. So today we're going to talk about social contracts. And I have to say that for me personally, I've been role-playing forever, it seems like. And this wasn't even something I'd heard of until, I don't know, last couple years probably.
Yeah, I first heard of social contracts, oh God, I was still in high school. Or I'm sorry, I had just started college. Sometime during college, I was listening to Fear the Boot back when they were in double-digit episodes, and they did an episode on the social contract. I thought it was very interesting, and then it just kind of faded away for a number of years, and then recently it's become kind of a big deal again, and so I talked to Dad, and I'm like, hey, we should do an episode about this, because it's kind of important nowadays.
Yeah, and it's definitely something I wish I would have known about sooner. I think these days one of the reasons maybe that it's kind of almost a buzzword now is so many of us are playing online now. And I feel like the social contract is even more important online because you're dealing with people a lot of times that you don't really know at all.
Yeah, you're not gaming with your friends around the kitchen table anymore. You're gaming with your friends in different states, different countries, sometimes different time zones. Or just a random pickup game. You're like, just shout out, hey, I want to run this game, who wants in? And then you have random strangers showing up, and you don't know them like you know your friends, so you don't know what kind of gaming experience they expect. And if you go on with your standard expectations, it might be different than theirs, and there's a conflict. And the social contract is designed to help alleviate that.
Yeah. I guess we should start out by telling people what the social contract is.
You don't want them to go to urbandictionary.com and find out for themselves?
I haven't looked on Urban Dictionary. Who knows what might come out if you search there.
True enough.
Is there any kind of porn that could come up with the social contract keywords?
I'm sure there can be. Rule 1 of the internet. If it exists, there's porn for it.
So would you like to take a stab at a definition for us, Christopher?
Social contract is the understood atmosphere and play style of your gaming group.
Yeah. And it's kind of an umbrella thing, right? Like there's kind of a lot of things that can fall under it.
Right.
So I think a great time to nail down your social contract is either session 0 or even before session 0.
Yeah, session 0 is great for doing the final touches on the social contract, but talking about it beforehand is definitely important.
Yeah.
Because it touches on things like, violence. Do you role play out the torture scenes? You just say, I'm going to torture him and roll some dice. Do you actually see the bad guy throw the child into the volcano, or do you just allude to that's what's happening?
Yeah.
It's just how the game is played out depends on, the comfort level of your players. And everybody is different, so it's always important to make sure everyone is comfortable at the game to get the most enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, totally. And in your guys' episode, you use the terms lines and veils, which I don't know if you came up with those or who came up with those, but I like them.
I did not come up with those. I don't remember who came up with them, but I can provide a link. We can throw it in the show notes.
Okay.
But the idea is that everybody has a line that they will not cross. And so that is the line. People who have children might draw a line on violence against children.
Right.
Someone who was violently assaulted might draw a line at, that type of assault. Some people might draw a line at cruelty to animals. Whatever your personal line is, it's there. Everyone knows about it. You do not cross.
Yeah.
And if anybody crosses that line, you just say, no, stop, we're done.
Right. And
you move on, no questions asked.
Right.
Veils are more like in the TV show when they cut to black, or they screen wipe to a different scene.
Or you see the waves coming in on the shore.
Yeah, you kind of know what's going on. Like, they totally alluded that those characters had sex.
Right.
But, this is daytime. This is daytime TV drama. They can't actually show them having sex because it's TNT.
Right. Right.
Or, like I said earlier, you could just allude to the fact that the big bad is throwing people in a volcano, but you don't show it. So it's something that you're comfortable with being in the game, but you don't want to play out, like my earlier mentioned torture. Some people don't want to have anything to do with that. Like, no, we are the good guys. We'll never torture. I'm drawing the line here. It doesn't happen. Other game groups were like, torturing might be an important way to get information because we're playing Warhammer 40,000 and everything's grimdark.
Yeah.
But I just want to make the skill roll and move on. I don't want to actually see it. I don't want to actually role play it out.
Yeah.
So the lines are, you do not cross this. The veils are, we know it's happening, but we're just going to allude to it and we're not going to actually play it out.
Right. Yeah. And so these are great things to establish before you even start making characters.
Right.
And, I guess part of why I didn't encounter this until recently is I always played with friends that I'd known forever. Mm-hmm. And in a group like that, sometimes this kind of stuff is just unspoken because you know each other so well. You know where their lines and veils are. You don't need to have an explicit conversation about it necessarily. Although I would say that even in that situation, you might be well advised to have the conversation, even if you feel like you don't need to, because you might find out that one of your buddies is really uncomfortable with something that happens in your games all the time, and he was just never comfortable saying anything about it.
Right. He just went along with it regardless of his comfort level, which I'm sure we've all done once or twice.
Oh, yeah. And I think as a GM, you should have a way for your players to at least be able to let you know these things privately, if not even anonymously.
Yeah.
Because, you gave the example of someone who'd been assaulted,
Right.
And if I'd been assaulted and it makes me uncomfortable, I may not be comfortable in front of a group of people saying, hey guys, I don't want to go here because I've been assaulted, or even telling my GM. But if I can just send a message and say, hey, this is one of my lines, let's not cross it.
Mm-hmm. If you're comfortable letting your GM know, a great way, if you're doing an online chat program, they usually have private messages.
Yeah.
You can just send a quick private message to your GM saying, hey, this is not cool. I don't want to talk about it. And then the GM will be like, all right, guys, let's take a few steps back, try a different path because this is not cool for the game. Or if you're, around a table at home with your friends, you can text them or something. Yeah. Otherwise, with the internet being what it is, as a GM, you can totally set up an anonymous tip line.
Yeah.
Google makes great. You can make a Google form or Google form where people can fill out stuff after the game. I personally use it. So after every game, I ask my players, hey, go to this website real quick, answer these 3 questions, let me know what you think about the game. They submit it to me. It's anonymous. So you can do something like that. So it's an anonymous submission, but the GM gets it. There's lots of different avenues to let people know. And if you are comfortable with letting the entire table know that this is not something you're cool with, there's something called the X card, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's this card in the middle of the table with a big X on it. And as soon as something comes up you're not comfortable with, you just tap the card and everyone knows to not go any farther. Stop, take 2 steps back, try again.
Yeah. And I think an important part of all this too is whether someone's tapping that X card or they're letting you know, hey, this is one of my lines or this is one of my veils, is you should let them know ahead of time that you're not going to require an explanation and you're not going to ask for one. Like, if you're like, I'm not comfortable with child endangerment scenes, I'm not going to be like, well, why not? Give me a good reason. It's just like, okay, cool, moving on.
Yeah. Yeah, part of the social contract is also the respect of the other people you're playing with.
Right.
They have to respect your your lines. They have to respect what you're not comfortable with, just as you have to respect what they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
You know, you may be perfectly happy describing how you eviscerate an orc, but they're like, dude, I don't do well with blood and guts, and that time in bio class where we had to dissect a frog, I puked and fainted, so I don't want to deal with that.
Right. Yeah. So one reason I think that it's a good idea to do this even before session 0 is this might actually be part of your process. Like, let's say you're in a situation where you don't just have 4 friends that are the only people you know that role play and that's who you're going to game with, but you're actually selecting players. This would be a good way to kind of gauge compatibility, you know, because maybe you're wanting to do a Ravenloft campaign and you want to really go into horror and gore and all this stuff. Well, if you have a player that's really uncomfortable with that, it just may not be a good fit, you know, that player with this particular group or this particular campaign. And it's much better to find that out before people invest time.
Right.
Then you're in the middle of a session and all of a sudden people are getting uncomfortable and people are getting upset and you're not having fun anymore. Like, no one's having fun. As soon as someone at the table is uncomfortable, chances are good that like no one's having fun at that point, especially not the person who's uncomfortable.
Right. And as my buddies over at the RPG Academy podcast say, if you're having fun, you're doing it right. Which the corollary is, if you're not having fun, something's wrong and you need to fix it.
Yeah.
And speaking of fixing it, another very important thing about the social contract is that it's a living thing. It's not you sit down at session 0, you type it up, and that's it. Things get forgotten. Things that you don't even expect to happen will come up. So, you know, during the game, the social contract will be revised. Something will happen. You're like, whoa, that's not cool. Or on the flip side, you may be like, you know what? I said no to torturing whatsoever, but I think I'm okay if we veil it.
Okay.
So we can go ahead and try that, and then you can delete things from the social contract as well as add things.
Yeah.
It's a living, breathing document. It's not set in stone.
Yeah. And a great point that you guys made in your episode was it may actually vary with the same group with different games. And you guys made a really great point that I want to bring up here is you talked about, you know, let's say you normally play something like D&D, and let's say you're going to do like a vampire game or something, and maybe you're going to go into these areas that normally would either be a line or a veil for your group, but you make a decision of, with this game, we're going to try this. And you guys made a great point that if you do that, like, everybody should be on board and everybody should participate, because, you know, if everybody's going outside of their comfort zone and then you have one person that's not, it's kind of weird.
Right. It's fine if you're uncomfortable, if everybody's uncomfortable together, and you go into it knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable.
Right. But if you've got the one person sitting back just going, you guys are dorks, then it's just not as fun.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you had said earlier about compatibility, because if the rest of the group wants to try this thing that's outside their comfort zone and one person doesn't, then they just don't show up for that game. You know? They're your friend if you're doing it in person, so they should understand and respect that. And if it's just some random person you found online, you don't have to let them know.
Right, yeah. One thing that I sometimes will do with people that I don't know or have never played with me before is I'll give the campaign a rating. Like, I'll say, this is rated R, you know? So people kind of know what that means, you know?
Yeah, I actually, for doing ratings like that, I like to use the TV rating system instead of the movie rating system, because that gives you, I think it has a little bit more fine control. Instead of just saying, you know, TV 13, so it should be 13 or older, you know, animated violence, harsh language. So, you know, you're playing a slightly more grown-up version of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Where you can say, fuck you, Zuko, as opposed to, I'm going to kick your butt.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it, because you might have someone who's fine with foul language, but you start getting into graphic violence and they're not comfortable with that.
Right, and that's where the TV rating system, I think, is better, because rated R could mean a whole host of things.
Right, why is it
if
R?
You say, or even if you go with the video game rating system, you know, mature due to graphic violence, strong language, sexually suggestive themes, then you know why it received that rating, as opposed to just a blanket, oh, this is an quote-unquote adult movie.
Right. Yeah. And we're kind of coming from the GM perspective here and talking about, how to make sure your players are comfortable at the table. But this is also for you,
Yes.
So this is your time to tell your players, hey, here's my lines. I don't want any rape scenes, for instance, just don't go there.
Exactly.
Or if there's anything like that you that would make you uncomfortable if your players start doing it.
Mm-hmm. And part of the social contract could be something as, not to poke fun at you and your bad GMing style, but the premature ending of your Primordia game was because the Warlock ran away.
Yeah.
You know, that would be something you talk about and be like, okay, if things start turning hairy in a combat situation, are we all going to run or are we all going to stay? Because one person running away, if they're not running to get help, is probably going to cause at least one player death. So you have to know as a team beforehand, if things get hairy, what are we going to do? Right. Are we going to die in a blaze of glory, or are we all going to retreat and come back with a different strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And that experience and a few other experiences have led me to embracing the social contract to the point now I'm just starting a new campaign, and right away in the forum I posted, here's our social contract, let's discuss this, and it's a conversation too, because I'm asking for, let me know, are there things, lines or veils for you personally? Let me know, and I'll add it to the document so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and with forums, again, you can use private messages to the GM, be like, hey, I want to add this to it, but I don't want everyone to know that I'm the one adding it.
Yeah. So since you kind of brought us here, one thing that you can define in your social contract as a GM and, the players too, is what do you as a group define as, quote, antisocial behavior? So, and this varies from group to group. Like for me personally as a GM, I don't like it when PCs steal from other PCs or when there's actual PC on PC violence. But if I'm in a group where all the players are okay with that and it's kind of agreed to ahead of time that this is okay, then I might be okay with that.
Right. Personally, I always say character versus character conflict is fine. When your players start conflicting, that's when you have a problem.
Yeah.
So every time someone says, oh, PvP is great, I'm like, no, PvP is horrible. CVC, great.
Yeah.
But that's another thing for the social contract is, where do you draw the line with, do your characters just disagree, or can they actually come to blows?
Right.
And another thing that's important to know is how your group works together as a group. Because you guys are fighting for your lives together, you're traveling together, you're trusting the other people with your lives, with, if you have someone who is taking care of all the loot and handing it out later on, you're trusting them with your livelihood. You're trusting the paladin to properly brush and feed your horses. So make sure that your players, or make sure that your characters have a reason to be together and a reason to trust each other.
Yeah.
Because it's fine to have, contrary to popular belief, it's fine to have a paladin and a rogue in the same party. Because maybe the paladin is not lawful stupid. Maybe he realizes that having someone around to do the things he can't will be beneficial. And at the flip side, the rogue knows that when the truth needs to be told, no one's going to believe him, even though he's the face of the group. But they will believe the paladin because he's a paladin of Paylor. Of course he's going to tell you the truth. So just because there are classically conflicting character classes, like the druid and the necromancer, make sure that your characters have a reason to group together, and if they don't, you might have to change something.
Yeah. Because
I have a let me tell you about my character story.
Awesome.
I was GMing, because I usually do. I was GMing, we were playing Old World of Darkness. This was back early 2000s.
Okay.
We had a vampire, a mage, and a hunter.
Oh my.
And the vampire and the mage were friends before he became a vampire.
Okay.
And so those two had had a link together, so we had a reason for the group to stay together. And then the hunter was like, oh yeah, the reason why I'm a hunter is because my family was murdered by vampires and I'm seeking revenge. I'm like, really? And this was, I was in high school, so I didn't know any better at the time. Like, well, that's the character he wants to play. I'm going to let him play it. And session 1, the vampire said something. The hunter decided to try to kill him, and the mage and vampire killed the hunter.
Oh, man.
It's like, well, if you don't have a reason for the group to stay together, some character is going to die.
Yeah.
Especially if they are at odds like that. Like the dwarf who has favored foe half-orcs, and the other guy wants to play a half-orc barbarian. You have to talk about outside of game why they're not going to kill each other before you get to that point, because otherwise someone's going to walk away with hurt feelings and a dead character.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the more conflict there is between two player characters, the more those two players need to be communicating out of character, at least, just to make sure, hey man, you realize that I'm doing this because it's my character, and I'm totally cool if your character smacks me down because I think you should. We're all good. Right. This is just fun. Because sometimes you may be thinking, oh, this is all good, we're all just having fun, but people get attached to their characters. They get in character. Yeah. And sometimes even though you shouldn't be upset, you get upset. It just happens.
Yeah. That's and when things like that happen, how do you handle it? That's something that's important to talk about in the social contract. When conflict erupts within the group and you guys decided we're not going to role play out the conflict, you have to know how you're going to settle it. Is it going to be opposed diplomacy checks by both sides of the argument? Whoever rolls highest wins the argument and you move on from there? Or is it going to be an out of character? You can do rock, paper, scissors. Yeah. Or, do you go out of character and then just have the player say, this is why I believe this is the way to do it? And then everyone at the table casts a vote for one side or the other. There are so many different ways to handle in-character arguments out of character that you just need to know what your table's going to do before that happens. Otherwise, again, you could have hurt feelings. You're like, oh, well, you chose opposed diplomacy roles because he's a bard and he has the highest diplomacy, so he's always going to win.
Right.
Like, well, that's how I always do it. So it wasn't anything on him. It's just, if you want to convince the other players, learn the diplomacy skill. Yeah.
I was running an adventure just the other night, and I had a couple players kind of get into some conflict, and it was all fun and games, joking around. Basically, the one character scammed the other character, and the players just on their own decided, hey, I'll roll my this versus your that, and decided to resolve it that way. And it was fine because everybody was laughing, nobody was getting upset. So that was something that would normally, in my book, be kind of against the contract, but I didn't worry about it because it's like, well, everybody's cool with it, so it's okay.
Right. And that goes back to the social contract is evolving.
Right.
Normally that's not how you handle it, but that's how they wanted to handle it, so go for it. Cool.
Yeah.
And another thing that, for me personally, talking about when characters get into it and something is going to happen to the detriment of another, in my personal opinion, when you're gaming, yes, this is my character. So yes, I am the actor, but I am also part of the audience. Mm-hmm. So it's always interesting to see any ensemble cast TV show that you've ever seen has some sort of conflict between the characters in the show. But as a player, you're a bit more invested. But at the same time, remember, you're also the audience. So yeah, it might be fun to see your character get swindled by the other character this one time because that's just great storytelling.
Right.
Feel free to just let things happen, which I know that's more of a inter-party conflict type discussion, even though we're talking about social contract, but I just figured I'd throw it out there since you kind of brought it up.
Yeah, and to continue the TV show metaphor, it's one thing to have a conflict that's going to last for an episode. That can be a lot of fun. But, it's the conflicts like what you were talking about with the paladin and a rogue, where it's like these characters are going to be in conflict for the entire show. Those are things that can really be problems.
Yeah.
Because that can get old.
That's assuming it's a paladin of Paylor, not a paladin of Vecna.
Right.
Or Oledamara.
Yeah. Now, one of my pet peeves that I always mention in the social contract discussion is it really bothers me when the player characters are having a disagreement and one of the players decides to kind of force everyone's hand by just going off by themselves. And it's this very passive aggressive, like we're in a dangerous dungeon. I want to go left. You want to go right. Well, I'm just going to go left. And if nobody follows me, so be it. But it's kind of like you're forcing everyone to follow you because they know that you'll probably die all by yourself.
Yeah, that's something important to talk about.
Yeah. And I've learned that, it's kind of rough, like in the moment to be like, oh, hey, I don't want people to do that. Because then it just seems like you're taking sides. So it's a lot better in the very beginning and be like, hey, I don't want this to happen. Like find some other way to settle this dispute other than, or what I usually say is if your character goes off alone, I'm not going to pull any punches. You're going to encounter what you encounter, and it's probably not going to go well for you because the dungeon was built for 5 people, not 1.
Exactly. But on the flip side of that is that sometimes, I've in the past been that player who said, I'm going left. You guys can follow if you want to, because the rest of the group was taking so damn long to decide on what to do.
Yeah.
Like after 10 minutes, make a decision and go.
Right. Yeah.
Don't sit there debating, well, my spot check says that I saw this trail of what could be slime, but this guy's search check says he thinks he sees a hidden door over that way, so which way should we go? It's like, no, just pick a path and go with it. Because I have been the GM, I've been the player on both sides when that happened, that sometimes I've once been in a game where the entire session was nothing but planning.
Yeah.
And after a while, it just gets to the point where we're planning out such minutia. It's like, let's just do this. Otherwise, we're going to be planning for the next 5 sessions and nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
So talking with your group beforehand when a conflict comes up, when a discussion comes up, make sure that everybody knows, as the GM, once they start discussion, you're going to hit start on your stopwatch. And after 5 minutes, you're going to ask them to do something, or you're going to ask them what they're doing, and the team leader, whoever it happens to be, will tell the GM what you do, and the entire party is going to do it.
Yeah. So part of this also can just be things like house rules. Like everybody starts out with all 18s, or table conventions. Like what do you do when the die rolls off the table and things like that.
Yeah, if the die is cocked, are you using, do you use dice rollers or physical dice?
Right. Yeah. And then part of it is also if there are host rules. So if you're playing at someone's house, things like no smoking, always use a coaster, things like that.
Does the host shelve for food all the time?
Right.
Is the host expected to cook? Is someone else expected to come over early and help prep? If you guys are playing at someone's house, for the love of God, clean up your shit when you're done. Don't leave a mess.
Yeah.
Throughout high school and college, I played with pretty much the same group the entire time, and we would always play at my buddy Josh's house. And so we would usually show up around 3 or 4 o'clock. We'd play for an hour or two, and then we'd stop and order pizza. We'd eat. His wife would join us for food, and then we'd keep playing. And then afterwards, after we were done gaming, we'd pack up all of our books, and then we'd spend the next half hour helping them clean their house.
Yeah.
They were hosting, and we're not horrible people, so we decided to help clean up. And, if you have to cut a little bit early to make sure things are clean, that's fine.
Yeah.
Be nice.
And the host and the GM are not always the same person. So think about, is this something you should discuss with the host or the GM or both? Because I think you guys brought up the example of having unexpected guests come with you.
Yeah.
That's something
that
to
was
discuss.
Devin's story.
Yeah, that's something to discuss with the host and the GM. Both, you need both their approval for that to be cool.
Exactly. If you're playing online and your cousin's in from out of town, they can hop on another computer, no problem.
Right.
But, when the host, who's not the GM, is expecting 4 people to show up and 5 people show up, and, had an entire game session set up for, 4 players and not 5, all of a sudden things get thrown kind of out of whack, and you're like, why is this stranger in my house? I don't know who they are. What are they doing here?
Right, yeah.
Well, the GM said it was okay. Well, then take him over to the GM's house.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not so much the GM as the GM's significant other, because I've played at places before where the GM's wife or husband didn't want people they didn't know coming over. The GM didn't really care, but, you have to respect the people who live there.
Yep.
Not just the people in your group, but all the people that live in the house.
Exactly.
Another consideration if you're online is also think about if you're streaming or you're putting things on YouTube, think about your audience. So you might want to have things in your social contract for the audience, just certain things, like, hey, let's not go beyond a PG-13 rating because I don't want to have to put an explicit tag on this. Things like that.
Yeah. Or if you're doing, if you're a podcaster.
Yeah.
Not that I know any of them, but if you're a podcaster and you're doing an actual play and you have friends or family who are listening in, or your boss is also a gamer who listens to your podcast, like, hey guys, let's just keep it clean because, my boss listens to this and I don't want him to have a reason to get me fired.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And another thing that popped into my mind was group roles are something very important to talk about before you start, because let me tell you another story. I
love stories.
I was a player in this one. We were playing Dresden Files, and I had made a face character. So I made my character specifically to be the party face with all the social skills and everything. And the GM set it up perfectly. There was this, we had to do some negotiating with the Fae, and we were brought before the envoy of the fairy courts. I was getting ready to plead our case before them, and this other player's like, yeah, so I stand up and I blurt blah-de-blah. Like, dude, this is my moment to shine. This is what I built my character for. It's like, whatever, this is what I say, and he rolls his dice.
Yeah.
And so
that's not cool, man. That's not cool.
Right. It completely stepped on my toes. It burst my bubble. I was like, well, I've got nothing to do for the rest of the game. So make sure that the character roles are understood by the players.
Yeah.
Just because someone's not a very outspoken person that could be the quieter type doesn't mean that they don't want to be the talky character in game. And they're just waiting for their chance to roll that diplomacy check or, make that intimidation check. But if you don't understand as a character, as a player, what that character is, what they're supposed to do, what the player built them for, then you could totally step all over their toes and not even realize it. So know who the quote-unquote leader is of the group for, to go to D&D, use that as a baseline. Who is the exploration leader? Who is the social leader? Who is the combat leader?
Yeah, absolutely. That, and you're more likely to survive as a party if you discuss these things.
Yes.
Especially in games like D&D where you kind of have roles that you need to have someone covering.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just made me think of something that's almost in the realm of PvP that I've seen come up more than once in games. That's a good thing to discuss is, how do you feel as a group about a situation where, like say in D&D, you have a character down on the ground making death saves. It's the next player's turn, and instead of stabilizing that character, they go attack the monster again.
Well, because they haven't failed the death save yet, so they're fine.
Like me as a GM, that really bothers me.
Yeah.
I think it bothers me worse a lot of times than it bothers the actual players. But I'm kind of like, if someone's character dies just because one of the other players couldn't be bothered to stabilize them instead of doing 5 more points of damage, and I mean, I've seen groups handle that well, and I've seen groups handle it badly. The best I've seen is probably when the group actually will take a minute and discuss it and say, hey, I feel like there's a good chance I could bring this thing down with this last attack. but it is a gamble. Like, how does everybody, like, what should I do? You know, and that's an instance where I'll kind of let the metagame happen. You know, I'm not going to come in and stop that because I'm like, well, this is okay.
Yeah, because especially if the player of the downed character has a say, like, dude, I'm under a curse, so I have a disadvantage, so I'm probably going to fail. Save me now. Yeah. Stopping the game to discuss things like that are very much in the please do category, in my opinion. Because especially if it affects another character, you definitely, if you don't have that worked out ahead of time, then it's definitely something important to discuss. You know, a lot of times you're like, okay, let them make their first save and then worry about them. Because if you have to fail 3 saves before you die, well, we know that they can survive the first one unless, you know, there's a bad guy about to do a critical hit on them to cause a few failed saves. But as long as they know what the procedure is in that point, because, you know, it might be this character, the fighter decides to, instead of stabilizing attack, because they know that the clerics can use healing word on their turn because it's what the cleric has, you know, the bonus action spell for.
Right.
Then it's fine, but again, you need to know beforehand as opposed to when it happens, be like, that's not what you're supposed to do. And then getting into that argument about this is what I always do versus this is what I always do.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason or excuse, this is what my character would do, is never valid as a good way or a good reason to break the social contract.
Right. Because part of the social contract is why your character trusts and is trusted by other characters. So if this is what your character would do, then that character would not have been in that group to begin with.
Right. Yeah. And besides that, there's always exceptions, right?
Yeah, there's an exception to every rule.
You have creative control of your character, so you choose what your character does.
Yeah.
You're not bound.
If ever you use the phrase, that's what my character would do, to validate you being a jackass, then there is no exception to that rule. Don't be an ass.
Right. It's kind of like anytime you start a sentence with, I probably shouldn't say this, but just don't say it.
Or I'm not racist, but I'm not sexist, but
right.
I'm not a homicidal maniac, but anytime you start a sentence off like that, you should never finish it. Because nothing good ever comes of those sentences.
Agreed. Just like nothing ever comes from saying, well, that's what my character would do, so I'm doing it. Screw you guys.
Yeah. Well, this is what my player would do. Grab his character sheet, light it on fire. I had no control over me. It's what my player would do. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. It's right here in the DMG. When player does this, you must set their sheet on fire. Well, yeah, it's my handwriting, but it's
still in there.
To do that.
See Rule 0.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think we've covered all the good examples of things you want to consider for your social contract?
I know we haven't covered all of them, but I think we've hit on the major things. You know, just take 20 seconds and think of anything that has ever, I'm telling the listeners specifically, to figure out what should go in the social contract. Take 20 or 30 seconds, think of all those times in games before that you wanted to punch somebody in the face or set their character sheet on fire. Yeah. And those are the things that need to be in the social contract. Anything that gets you upset about gaming that you don't want to see, that's what needs to be in the social contract.
Yeah. Or anything that's happened in the past that led to a group breaking up.
Yep.
Or losing a player over something.
Yeah.
And you'll tend to revise your contract with each campaign, because every campaign you learn, oh, I should add this because this thing happened, or oh, I don't need to worry about this anymore because I don't care anymore.
Right.
Whatever.
Like my dog just died, so I don't want to see the bad guy kicking puppies. But it's been a year and a half since my dog died. I'm cool with that now. It's not such a raw wound anymore. We can go ahead and take that off.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So maybe now we can talk about, I feel like that was the easy part. Now comes the hard part. What to do when someone breaks the contract.
In my opinion, if someone breaks the contract, you stop the game right there.
Yeah.
Because they might not realize that they did it, or they might be doing it testing to see if they actually can get away with it. Some people, they're just predisposed to, being rebellious, saying you can't do this, then they will want to do it anyway, at least once, to see if they can get away with it.
Yeah.
So as soon as someone breaks the contract, call them on it. Stop it right then and there. Be like, dude, that's not cool. Remember, this is paragraph 3, subsection A, sentence Q of the social contract.
Yeah.
That's not something that we're doing in this game. And they could be like, oh, oops, I totally forgot. I'm so sorry. Or they might grumble, fine, okay. But they realize that they're going to be called on it, and they're less likely to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think you want to resolve it as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. But I think you want to resolve it and then move on.
Right.
Like, don't dwell on it. Because if something's making someone uncomfortable, last thing you want to do is have a half-hour discussion about it.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing, is that as part of the social contract, you did something you're not supposed to do. Stop, rewind, try again, and just don't even bring it up afterwards.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Just don't dwell on it. Just keep going.
And if this is like a one-time thing that happens with a given player, like no big deal, whatever. But if you have a certain player that you keep having these issues with, mm-hmm. then I would definitely talk to that player privately.
Yes.
Just one-on-one, and just be like, hey, this is what we all agreed to, and you're violating it, so what are we going to do about this?
Yep. And like I said, sometimes they might totally forget, which happens. Maybe it happens and no one catches it, and then you might want to, and you're like, oh my gosh, this totally happened and it shouldn't have. And if someone specifically put no to that on the social contract, apologize to them,
mm-hmm.
especially as a GM or another player. If you realize, like, oh my gosh, this totally happened, I'm so sorry, I totally forgot, to let them know that their feelings aren't being trod upon or ignored, and then talk to the I don't want to say offending player, but talk to the player who slipped up and be like, hey, remember we talked about this and this is not cool, so try not to let it happen again.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, your final recourse is just, sorry, man, you're just not going to be able to game with us anymore because you keep wanting to rape all the NPCs, and we told you we're not doing that in this campaign.
Yeah. And sometimes that's what you got to do. And and with the social contract, it's easier to show them the social contract, be like, hey, you agreed to not do A, B, C, and D, and you did, so we don't want you back until you get your shit together. As opposed to if you don't have a social contract and they keep doing the same thing and you don't let them know, well, what do people usually do? They, quote unquote, cancel the game, and then they just have everybody else meet on a different night at a different house.
Right.
Not that I've ever done that before. Of course not. I've always been an upstanding citizen of gaming fandom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, if you're going to fire someone, right? You need documentation.
Yep.
And you're good. So that's your social contract, and probably if you're to the point where you don't want them at your table anymore, they've probably violated it more than once, and you can say, hey, remember last week and last month and 2 months ago.
Yeah.
It's not like this is the first time we've had an issue. Mm-hmm. It's like we've been trying, but and it's not that this is a bad person. It's just not everybody fits.
They're not a good fit for the game.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're not good with this game, but we'll let you know when the next game starts, and we'll have a new social contract that might not include these things that you want to do.
Right.
But I think that's the very important thing to reiterate is you're not a good fit for this game. When we start another game, we're definitely going to call you back because you're our friend, or we like gaming with you, or whatever. So we're not disowning you. It's just this specific game story that's being told is not what you're looking for. So when we're doing something that you're looking for, you'll have more fun too.
Right. Yep. Yeah, the whole point of this is to avoid the kind of conflict that you don't want at the gaming table. Conflict between players that is making things unfun for, at the very least, the players involved, but probably everybody, Because it's usually really uncomfortable when people are in conflict at the table. Like everybody's uncomfortable, not just those two people.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is everyone's responsibility at the table.
Oh, definitely.
You know, everybody knows the contract. Everybody should help to, quote, enforce it. Mm-hmm. But the buck does kind of stop with the GM.
Yeah.
You know, it is kind of, it's your game. So if no one else steps up, you need to step up and say, hey, we need to address this.
Yeah, it's not like GMs have any other responsibilities at all.
Right. You got to do it all, man.
Yeah.
Man up or woman up.
Yeah. GM
whatever
up.
The case may be. GM up. That's right.
GM up is the name of my Monsanto cover band.
Nice. Yeah, and another reason that I think this is great to do at the very beginning is, you know, as a GM, you don't have to accommodate every player, right? So if you're wanting to do the horror campaign and you're wanting to have blood and gore and you have a player that's like, I'm not comfortable with that, instead of, you know, doing this campaign and now you can't do this part of it that was kind of what had you excited about the campaign, you can just say, well, then, you know, this isn't the campaign for you because that's kind of what this is about, but I'll definitely call you for the next one where we won't do that.
Yeah, I'm not going to run Curse of Strahd with a Y7 rating.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, you know, you can just avoid, you know, having to have that player feel uncomfortable or having to have everyone else at the table make an accommodation that they don't want to make.
Yeah.
So
another interesting thing that I totally forgot earlier when we were talking about what should go into the social contract is how much control the GM has over player reactions.
Yeah.
Because a lot of groups, when things get into combat, the GM describes everything. You know, even the hits and the misses on the PCs.
Okay.
But
yeah.
As a player, I prefer to describe how awesome my PC is when the NPC misses. And what the GM has in mind isn't always what I foresee my character doing. So, you know, just talking about how much power the GM has to describe players' actions is important.
Yeah.
You know, personally for me, part of my standard boilerplate social contract is in combat, I describe what the NPCs attempt, and you describe how it happens. Like,
okay.
So the evil sorcerer starts carving demonic sigils in the air, and 3 bolts of dark force goes towards you. And then I roll the dice. I got 1 hit and 2 misses. Player, tell me what that looks like. Because it's their chance to shine. You know, do they do the whole Matrix thing where they're running around bouncing over things, or does the fighter just pull up his shield and, you know, bounces off of his shield, or does the monk do the whole take the very wispy sword and just slice the sorceress bolts in half? It doesn't matter. Mechanically, it's a miss, but how the characters react to it tells you a lot about them. So I don't like to take that away from the players. And sneaky GM tip, it also is less cognitive load for you to have to describe every attack, every miss for every character in the combat, which can get tedious. Having 4 people share the load means you have 4 times as many awesome ideas being thrown about.
Yeah, totally. And then hopefully, you know, because I've definitely seen where you'll have some players that just, they're all over that. And then you have other players where they're like, and they, not only do they not have anything, but they don't want to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so then maybe you can do it for that player, or just skip that.
Yeah.
We'll just move on.
If that player doesn't want to have that control and they want the GM to do it, then okay. But if every player wants me to do it, no.
Yeah.
I'll do it for 1 out of the 4 of you. 2 if there's 5, but not everybody.
And even that 1, you hope that they come around, right?
Right.
It's like, well, they just need a little time to get used to it. Maybe once a session you put them on the spot, you know, till they get used to it.
Yeah, because after a while, you know, it's that game the way you want your players to play. You know, if you want to have description and awesome action for things, that's what you describe, as opposed to, I roll, it's a 27, does that hit your AC? Yes, take clack, clack, clacks, 27 damage. That's really lame. And, well, I personally think that's lame. Some players and GMs like that because they just want to get through the combats as quickly as possible. That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, don't spend like 5 sentences. My rule of thumb is 1 sentence with an ellipses in the middle. So half your sentence is the warm up for the attack. You make your attack roll, and then the rest of the sentence is described based on the outcome of the roll.
That's a cool way to do it. I like that.
Yeah. Well, I picked it up from Fate. They actually have a sidebar when talking about invoking aspects is the ellipses trick. So describe your action and then leave an ellipses, roll your dice, and if you need to invoke an aspect, then you describe how you almost failed, but your awesome aspect interceded and made you succeed.
Nice. I love it. Yeah, that's a great way to handle it. I'm going to have to try to remember that and use that myself. And that's a great way for, one of those players that's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That you can kind of give them this little formula.
Right.
And you're like, just do this. That's all you need to do. And it also keeps things going, because sometimes you'll have the player that will go into a 5-minute monologue about their 6-second turn if you let them. So.
Exactly. So there's a fine line between just enough and too much.
Yep.
Be sure that line is in your social contract so the other players can be like, dude, you're monologuing again. Stop it.
Yeah. And a sentence is not like Edgar Allan Poe where it's a paragraph disguised as a sentence.
Yeah.
No semicolons allowed.
Yeah. You're allowed 3 punctuations. You can have 1 comma, 1 ellipses, and 1 period.
Grammar, the RPG.
Exactly.
Awesome. Any big ideas that we've missed, or?
I think I've squeezed everything that my brain can have right now.
Yeah. I'm coming up empty. So yeah, just, don't be a dick.
Right. And if you think that Will Wheaton is a bit too vulgar, then follow Bill and Ted and be excellent to each other.
There you go. Will Wheaton is too vulgar.
Shut up, Wesley.
Shut the fuck up, Wesley. That was the director's cut
of
that scene. I could totally hear Sir Patrick saying that.
And now that you say it, I hear it in my head too.
All right, Christopher. Well, thanks so much for coming on and helping me tackle this topic. It's a big topic.
It really is, and I'm sure that we'll hopefully have lots of feedback of different people with different things in the social contracts. One other quick thing I did want to mention, though, is it's never too late to draw up a social contract. Yes. If you're in the middle of a game and you've had a few of those awkward moments, maybe next session you let everyone know, hey, we're not playing, we're talking about our social contract and getting on the same page.
Yeah.
If you're coming to the end of a game, it might be best to hold off. If you guys have been friends forever and you know each other and you don't have those awkward moments, then that's fine, but it's never too late. If you think you need one, then next game session, get one done instead of actually playing. And then the following sessions will be better because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I know, back in the day before I even knew what a social contract was, there would be those sessions where I'd have to come in and say, okay, guys, this thing happened last week. I really didn't like it. I don't want it to happen again. And you'd have to do that, 4 or 5 times during a campaign. So it's just so much easier just to get it all done at once. And it's just easier when it's just, hey, we're going to talk about this because we should have done it and we never did it, as opposed to we're talking about this because of what Jeff did last week. You know what I mean? It's just a little easier.
Such a bastard.
Sorry, Jeff. I don't actually know any Jeffs right now, so that's why I picked that name.
I've never gamed with a Jeff before.
I have, but it was like way back in high school. And he was awesome. He never broke any social contracts, so.
Good for you, Jeff. Good for you.
Way to go, Jeff, if you're listening. Probably not. Awesome, man. Is there any information that you want me to share in the show notes, or you want to share now, like your Twitter or any website, anything like that?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is @EldritchFire.
Okay.
I can be found on Google+, Christopher Ruthenbeck. And, of course, you can find me at the Sharkbone Podcast, and we are a proud member of the RPG Academy Network. RPG Academy Podcast is the flagship podcast. We have the RPG Gamer Dad Podcast. She's a Super Geek Podcast.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of people. Just check out the RPGacademy.com, I believe, and they've got all the shows and affiliates listed. We're doing a gaming convention in Ohio this year. I think it is November 11th through 13th, a Catacon 2016, leveling up. You know, I've been helping them out with the promos and doing the promo images and pamphlets and such. So if you guys see any of those hanging out there on the internet, that's my work. I'm awesome. And speaking of, I do layout design for role-playing games. So if anybody is planning on doing something, small project, large project, hit me up. I'll be able to help you out. I believe I have reasonable rates.
Sweet.
Can reach me at any of the aforementioned social medias. My website is efpress.net. You can contact me there, contact me on Google+.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes. So if you didn't catch all that, just go to the show notes and you can just click. All right, that's going to wrap up episode 95. I want to thank Christopher again for taking the time to discuss the social contract with me today. I would love to hear from you. If you have any comments or feedback on this episode, you can shoot me an email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Let me know, do you use a social contract with your group? And if so, are there any items in your contract that we didn't discuss today that you think might be food for thought for other listeners? Also, if you'd like to share thoughts about social contracts with the community at large, a great place to do that is at the Game Masters Journey Google Plus community. Feel free to comment on my post for this episode 95 there. And that's a great place where people other than me can see what you have to say. And you can find a link to the Google Plus community in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. Towards the bottom of the show notes, you can find a button that'll take you to the Google Plus community if you want to join in on that discussion. You can follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker. You can follow me on Google Plus LexStarWalker. Again, the website, starwalkerstudios.com. Everything you need is there. Real quick, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my Tier 5 patron, Mr. Steve Strickland. Yeah, let's hear it for Steve. You the man.
Yes.
I want to thank Steve and all the patrons that support the show. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank everyone who leaves donations on the website and everyone who supports Star Walker Studios in any way, including telling your friends about the podcast. So if you enjoy Game Master's Journey and you'd like to see this show keep going strong and help me keep things going around here, head on over to the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. And towards the bottom of the show notes, I have a whole list of things that you can do to help out the show. And some of them won't cost you a dime. I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Star Walker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.